So welcome to part 3 of our findings for exploring the experience of neurodivergent engineers in the workplace. So this is part 3 of 5, and in this presentation we're going to look at getting on. So this is our participants' experiences in the workplace. We'll identify some physical, social challenges, also the impact on mental health, and participants' experiences of HR policies and practices. First of all, we'll look at physical challenges. So written communication was something that was reported as a challenge by the majority of our participants, particularly with things like interpreting information from long reports. So a number of our participants described this as really mentally draining, and also that took something that took them much longer than their peers as well. So we can see that Samuel describes that interpreting lots of information, it feels like there's a firework factory in his head, and that was really difficult for him sometimes. Online messaging platforms, particularly during COVID, was something that created a lot of additional stress for participants, as sometimes they felt that they missed important pieces of information. So Liam describes that he would miss stuff because it was just like ding, ding, ding in the background. And I'm still very much trying to work out the best route of how to deal with it, because it actually gets to the point where it's so stressful with things being chased. So Liam and a number of other participants as well described having requests made of them on online messaging platforms, but missing the messages because there was just a constant stream of other messages, and then feeling really stressed when they were being chased for the actions that were requested of them. Space was something that was really common among almost all of our participants. So it was highlighted that the office environment created challenges. So noise, lighting, temperature, a lack of flexibility about where to sit, and hot desking. So one of our participants described how having to hot desk was really stressful because she couldn't keep all of her reasonable adjustments, such as noise cancelling headphones, in one place, which meant that she would often forget them and be left without them. Having the option to select a permanent desk and wear noise cancelling headphones, and the flexibility to work from home enabled many participants to overcome these challenges and increase their productivity. So you can see that Sienna describes, being in a completely quiet house makes it so much easier to focus and concentrate. And this was something that numerous other participants described as well. Task and time management. Many participants reported that long meetings without a set agenda created challenges. So you can see that Shyla describes in meetings, so we have very, very long meetings, and I can focus for a while and then I'll zone out, and it's like not expressed in like an engaging way. So when there was no set agenda, many of our participants found it difficult to kind of maintain engagement. Something else that was really common among numerous participants was knowing when to speak and share contributions. So some of our participants described interrupting others and being interpreted as rude and kind of difficult in the meetings, whereas other participants were really conscious about kind of interrupting or speaking at the wrong time, that they often withheld their contributions altogether. So you can see that Ralph describes with this sort of meetings, when there's like 10 people, I've got something to say and I'm sitting there and I never find the right time to speak. And then I'll start speaking and someone else will start talking. I just don't know if I'm missing that social skill to, know when to start talking. And this was even more challenging in an online setting as well. So some participants, particularly those with ADHD, reported that they were often less productive in the morning. As a result, they tried to compensate by working longer hours in the evenings, which led to increased feelings of anxiety and stress. So numerous participants felt quite guilty because they felt their productivity was lower in the morning. So as a result, they would work long into the evening. And some participants found it really, really challenging to know when to switch off and start working. So you can see that Ralph here describes that he'll do 8 hours or whatever, and then 12 hours the next day in an attempt to kind of fulfill that need to kind of show that they were working harder. Social challenges. So contrary to kind of the literature, we found that The majority of participants really valued working in their teams. So there's quite often the portrayal that particularly autistic employees would much rather prefer to sit and work on their own. However, we found that our participants really valued their teams and the conversations that they had within those teams, particularly when conversations were related to work. So you can see a quote from Dylan here, but also Heidi expressed, I enjoy certain parts of my team, like bouncing ideas off them and chatting things through. We'll just bounce it around and it might turn into something really good. Social interactions in the workplace created challenges for some of our participants. So you can see that Arthur here describes the hardest thing was keeping eye contact with people. That's really hard. That's almost impossible, to the point where you're focusing so hard on keeping eye contact, you have no idea what they're saying. And social interactions outside of the workplace were challenging for some of our participants as well. So socialising with colleagues outside of work resulted in feelings of anxiety for many participants. And sometimes this was due to the nature of the activity. So you can see here that Joseph describes, historically, when I've gone out with work, especially if line managers are there or clients are there, I tend to just be anxious. I went out last week and it was to a very noisy pub with a disco attached, and I just hated it. It was horrible. Sometimes the stuff outside of work is quite daunting. We're now going to have a look at HR policies and practices. So most participants said that their organisations did not have specific policies and practices for neurodiversity. What is more, the use of existing neurodiversity-friendly policies depended a lot on the discretion of the line manager. So participants described that there were disability policies in place, but they weren't sufficient to address neurodiversity. But also, when policies were in place, the access to reasonable adjustments was very much dependent upon the line manager. So you can see that Max here describes there are some policies in place with HR as well, but the manager I was working with previously was very inflexible when it came to doing things that were outside of exactly his previous experience. Similarly, 75% of participants in our survey reported that there was no neurodiversity awareness training within their organisations. Disclosure was something that we explored both within our survey and interviews as well. So 47% of survey respondents and most of the interview respondents did not disclose their neurodiversity after receiving the job offer. And the reasons for non-disclosure, both in interviews and the surveys, were fear of isolation and bullying, stigma. They didn't feel it was relevant. So some of our participants felt that they had lived with their neurodiversity for so long and they were diagnosed later into adulthood that they felt that they had already developed coping strategies in order to be successful within the environment. Also, not having received a formal diagnosis also meant that some people didn't disclose during interviews and surveys. And we could see here from Charles's quote, I was kind of fearful of the fact that it would just go against me, so I didn't disclose it. Participants were more likely to disclose when they trusted their line manager or the organisation publicised a positive neurodiversity culture, and experiences of disclosure were mixed. So we can see here that Heidi had quite a bad experience of disclosure, and the HR manager said the HR manager wasn't very good. She said, what an awful label to get. Heidi had worked for this organisation for some time before receiving her diagnosis. And we can see here that Elliot had a completely different experience. So he says, yeah, I can't fault him. They've been really supportive. And if ever I've had an issue or I'm having like a wobble, I can get hold of the neurodiverse team and they are straight on it. Reasonable adjustment. So we have touched upon this previously within the presentation, but upon disclosure, the majority of organisations did not seem to conduct a job evaluation to see if any adjustments needed to be made. And many respondents reported that there was no set process for requesting adjustments. They often had to have conversations which made them feel uncomfortable. So many of our participants felt that they really had to expose their weaknesses and justify why they needed a particular adjustment. Amelia described, I feel like I have to share so much of myself in order to get the support. Some did not request reasonable adjustments because they did not know what was available and because of the subjective nature of the request being accepted. So Oliver here says, I struggle with subjectivity. I struggle kind of knowing what I can and can't ask for. And many employees reported a don't use it, lose it type of policy. And this resulted in software that had been implemented as a reasonable adjustment, been removed if it was not used within a specified time frame. And our participants described that due to the nature of project work, there would be particular projects where a specific software would be really useful. They would then move on to another project where the software wasn't needed, only then to be moved on to another project where, again, the software would have been really helpful, but it had been removed because they hadn't used it within a specified time frame. We're going to talk now about employee resource groups and mentoring. So some interview respondents described really positive experiences of engaging with ERGs because it created a sense of belonging, provided some really good information, and they described that it was really useful to see neurodivergent role models in senior positions. So I remember participants saying, well, if they can do it, then why can't I? But there are also some really common barriers to attending. So participation is voluntary. So often people running these ERGs are doing it without any allocated time. And the groups are normally held during unpaid lunch breaks. So some participants described that if there were other kind of everyday workload that were more important, these would often take priority over attending the employee resource group meetings. A lot of our participants described some quite negative line management experiences. So there were many instances of unsupportive line management with often bullying behaviours and examples of constructive dismissals. And this was especially experienced by autistic participants. So you can see that Florence says, an employer that has been quite supportive of me, and I'm saying I'm the next big thing, and go and quite aggressively, it's your fault the project is failing. There is something wrong with you. He suspended me. He wanted to have me assessed by psychiatrists and all this kind of thing. And I ended up it was going to the end in a legal dispute. This behaviour was further exaggerated by a lack of understanding and recognition of neurodiverse strengths. So we can see that Ralph says oh yeah, you can just update this note. And I'll be like, oh shit, dictation. And then I'm trying to I'm on camera, but I'm muting it, talking into the phone, and then trying to get the spellings from the phone. And Shyla describes, they valued my neurodiverse thinking without knowing that it was from ADHD. It's like they do try and mould you into being a certain type of person. There were also some really positive experiences. And again, these were dependent upon their line manager. So showing understanding was something that participants really valued. So Dylan describes, my boss knew before I knew that I was autistic. I could already see him making adjustments for my personality. For my neurodiversity, he was naturally making adjustments for just who I was. Also, line managers that showed trust made participants feel empowered. So Florence here describes, I suspect I'm being line managed by somebody that has a very similar brain to me. And therefore, because he can see that I've got the structure and I've got the plan and I've got a good set of, right judgment to do more of this, do less of that, I just tend to be left to get on with it. And participants really valued line managers that supported their career development. So Adam describes, he supports me so much and personally coaches me. I wouldn't be where I am without. It also takes the person to recognise you and give you those opportunities, putting you and guiding you in the right direction. Recognition was a really interesting area to look at. So the majority of survey participants felt that their accomplishments were compensated similarly to others who had achieved their goals. It is important to note that this percentage is lower than the percentage who felt that they received praise for good work. Similarly, less than half of respondents felt that there was a fair promotion process. So this could indicate that while praise was present, respondents felt that they were not promoted or financially compensated fairly in comparison to others within the organisation. Mental health. So many of the participants shared that their mental health has been, especially before their diagnosis. So I was feeling I wasn't performing well, and I was constantly, on edge. Getting the diagnosis and the reasonable adjustments helped, but also stopped me being so angry and frustrated with myself. I was just disappointed with myself. All autistic and ADHD participants had experienced burnout during their careers, and all autistic participants experienced bullying and harassment, and in some cases, this was quite severe. So you can see that Albert here says, I do honestly believe that people have used who I am as a weapon against me. I have been bullied, as in bullied enough that HR have been involved. I have been bullied seriously on 2 occasions in my career, and probably passive on many more. So that's the end of part 3. Fanda will take you through our next stop. So this is on moving up. So this will explore our participants' experiences of career progression. Thank you for listening.